a visitor, we are lucky to have the full circle of the finishing touches of this film and then to public presentation. And we have Director Tony Stone ready for some Q&A. I just want to start it off by saying how fascinating I found it that you were able to follow the entire trajectory just like right beside him. Like you never left his side, and then through news clippings and voices and the telephone calls, you were able to kind of ascertain the world around the events that are coming back to him. And that must have been an epic task for Charlton to be having to be the sole focus without any other actors to play off. Can you talk about that process, the decision to choose to shoot it so intimately, and the challenges for Charlton?
For sure. I mean, I think being an actor and being the only one on screen for the entire movie is definitely a dream. So I think it was pretty easy for him to just be full on, but he had the confidence to pull it off, which was really important. I don't think most actors would be maybe shy away from that, carrying the whole film on their shoulders in a sense. But I think the idea from the beginning was to be extremely subjective with Ted Kaczynski. There's so many things on the Unabomber where we see it from the FBI's perspective, and it just sort of becomes very cliched and uninteresting. For me, it was really interesting to see and to understand how this guy who lived in a off-the-grid shack pulled all this off. That was just the mystery of how did it happen. So wanted to really just create what that experience was like too. There's a lot of biopics that are just too much information. So really wanted to get to the essence of who Ted was more than anything else, and just have enough information so you're along the ride and there's the continuum of the storyline, but also get into the psychology of him, get to how the place was so important of where he lived and why he carried out his actions, and sort of and seeing the world through his eyes was really important, and wanting that escapism. So just that was sort of the trajectory of the process, was that was the immediate interest, was just being with Ted 100% of the time and seeing what that's like. And there's this whole other multi-million-dollar law enforcement side of the story that we do not see, and we leave that out. So it really is the Ted Chronicles.
Yeah, it was very interesting, because it was so quiet, like the small, like the computer store and everything like that. These are like tiny intrusions, like your everyday, but they take on this menacing presence. The slow motion of the red gases and the overlapping. The sound design was really great in that computer store, where like the bald guy with the mustache and the kid playing a video game, and it seemed like they're invading his psychology and just tipping him over the edge.
I mean, and something like that's sort of like an early bit of technology, which nowadays we're in a whole other realm of it, but still that minimal technology then bothering him is kind of interesting. But how limited that seems at the time, but how frustrating it was to him, and being prophetic of how much more we would rely on technology and how far it would go and what it would kind of do, the damage it would do.
And what was the interest in tackling Ted as a subject, and the timing of when this film was produced?
I think it was, the event itself was super interesting when it first happened, and just that mystery that we were talking about earlier. But also looking at American terrorism after 9/11, that was another interest of mine, after going actually through 9/11, being right next to the World Trade Center personally. So looking at terrorism within the homeland, and what that meant, American terror, and looking at other people in history that were declared terrorists in the time. People like John Brown, who at the time was a villain in the South, a hero in the North, and he's the one that sort of sparked the Civil War. as history's evolved, how we look back on him. So as we've kind of gotten farther away from Ted Kaczynski, we can kind of be more objective. His crimes are still obviously totally heinous and very disturbing. But in 10, 20 years, already at the current place we are with the looming climate collapse, environmental degradation, and where we are with technology, his ideas are far more interesting than they were 25 years ago. We're seeing the prophetic, words of his are taking on new meaning. So how will we look at him in 10, 20 years? How will we look at him in 30, 40 years? And so it's always evolving, and that's what's interesting. And that's where sort of this alternative history that I find interesting of, alternative histories are always kind of in flux. So, how it will evolve and what it means now into just another year or 5 years. So as I said in the beginning, this was a movie I wanted to make 10 years ago, and I would mention Ted Kaczynski, and people would be like, why would you ever want to make a movie on that guy? And I'd kind of have to explain myself. But now, as I've gotten closer to completion and now completed the film, it's obviously been very clear cut why this is sort of an interesting topic. In a way, the movie, what's in the film is sort of bigger than Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski is a way, a vehicle to talk about these ideas and talk about these issues in sort of a fable-esque way.
Yeah, definitely. And environmentalism reads very clear in this, and the intimate images of the forest. It gives a whole other perspective on the story of Ted. So I'd like to open it up for anyone else who might have some questions from the audience. You can yell it out and I'll repeat it for someone. Anyone? Yep.
A lot of the script was Ted's own words, so what was that process like? We saw those cryptograms. Has someone gone through the work of interpreting all of his writings, and did you go through all those writings?
We did. I mean, he had over 25,000 pages of writings. Maybe we didn't hit the 25 and we got to 10, but we read a lot. And the FBI did decode most of those journals. Ted's mistake was that he left a key for those coded journals in his cabin, along with a lot of other evidence. But that's where a lot of the sabotage crimes came to light. So there was all these mysteries in the town of Lincoln, Montana that happened that nobody knew why. But suddenly when Ted was arrested, all these mysterious things that happened were answered. So yeah, the VO is obviously word for word Ted Kaczynski. Most of the dialogue is word for word. A lot of the phone calls are based off letters that he wrote to his mother and brother. So that's what's sort of unnerving about this anti-hero story is that, we want to be careful with VO because usually it's sort of this crutch of this narrative device. But I think what's really chilling is that these really are his words, of course, and that sort of takes on this sort of extra layer of darkness. I think it's also important to understand that, we didn't want to obviously condone any of his actions, but we also didn't want to make sort of a simple vilification narrative. So that's where sort of striking the right balance of his words was super important, where, you understand at the beginning it really was this revenge. He takes violence more as an act of revenge than anything else, and then sort of finds political purpose, And that's sort of a really important thing, I think, with Ted Kaczynski, where he was sort of more lost and then found sort of meaning in his targets. It was still obviously, unacceptable, but how he kind of evolved from, revenge to political.
Anyone else? Yes?
We did not talk to him, and there was so much material on Ted and so much writing that we didn't feel like we needed to, and just wanted to be as objective as possible. And that's where we were approaching it more like a documentary and doing a lot of research more than anything else, to kind of get it right and be as honest as possible. And he's so honest in his writings, which is what's kind of incredible. He wrote 3 or 4 autobiographies on himself. That's something weird that actually his family did. They all wrote autobiographies about themselves. Didn't feel like we needed that. And also, Ted has kind of become his own PR machine, just in prison. So realized we would have his versions and his reflection on events, and just seeing how he would write about something in the past that we've also seen in the journal, sort of seen that it would sort of morph. So because he's so raw and honest in his own work, just didn't feel like it was needed, and feel like it would kind of pollute the objectivity we were trying to have, you know? I mean, at the same time, you see we're being extremely subjective on the other side, but we felt like being subjective and honest was a way to kind of give sort of clarity to the situation and actually have sort of a more objective, you know, sort of bird's eye view of the situation.
Yeah, I noticed that it did feel like documentary, even though it was very expressionistic stylistically. And you've previously made the documentary Peter and the Farm. Can you, and that's also like this man in the natural world and the pressures on that. Can you explain like how maybe those two connected and maybe birthed this?
Sure. So I made another film that was about a farmer in Vermont who was an alcoholic, back to the lander, who was all alone on his farm. He also got a few DWIs, so he couldn't leave. But yeah, the two, you know, the interest in that other tale is, I think, you know, looking at people that are self-sufficient is one theme super interested in, and people that kind of find purpose from living off the land, you know, and that meaning or purpose. And I myself have spent a lot of time off the grid, so connecting with those characters that are sort of iconoclasts, obviously to different degrees, again, a farmer versus an American terrorist, but just, you know, kind of wanted to get into the gray and just sort of find humanity in the darkness of some of these characters, because I think we've gotten so black and white, especially because of technology, that, you know, we kind of need to sort of, you know, there's sort of beauty in everything, and looking at the beautiful and terrible within, you know, these sort of American archetypes.
Any other questions?
We got time for one more, Jason.
Okay.
We got one here. Or there.
Okay, we'll do both of those. We'll give a bonus. Go ahead, you.
Is there a chance that Kaczynski might see your film? And if he did, what do you think he might think about it?
That's a good question. You know, what's weird is since will Kaczynski ever see the film, was the question, and what would he think about it? He has been moved since the film was made, so we have that ending, which we shot when he was actually in the prison, so he's actually behind that jail that you see. He's in there. That was pretty wild to make the whole film. We filmed that at the last moment, right before COVID hit in February of 2020. So he's actually been moved to a medical facility, medical prison, within the last month. So maybe he'll have access to TV. I don't think in his old prison in Supermax he would have been able to. He'd probably be super annoyed by the film, but be interested that we got the place. I don't think he's seen many movies is another thing, so I think the format would also be very interesting for him to even watch. He's very perfectionist about what people have gotten wrong, so people in the media that would talk about him after he was arrested, he would write entire letters about the details that they were inaccurate about, you know, so he's very obsessive, so I'm sure we would get a long list, but I think for him to see the place and to relive it would be powerful, even if he wouldn't necessarily let us know, you know, and it would be interesting. He is terminal, so he probably only has, according to a letter he wrote to somebody, a year, maybe two to live. So interesting timing with this thing, where we've been so deep into it and followed him so closely, and, you know, had obviously some sort of, you know, empathy for his situation, that, you know, he's, you know, probably not going to be with us much longer.
And the final question?
Tony, so something that was really interesting, I think, about how you made the film was actually going to the place where his cabin was and reconstructing it on top of there. And yeah, I know that a lot of the characters in and around the Lincoln, Montana scenes were actual residents and his actual neighbors. I know you've just been there to launch the film. I'm curious what their response was.
That was very cool. So we had the North American premiere in Montana, in Missoula, which is, you know, an hour away from Lincoln, where we shot, and everybody came down from Lincoln. And we were kind of holding out for the North American film premiere to actually be with the Montanans that we had shot with, because they were so important and so helpful and open to the whole process. You know, the film had premiered all the way across to the Berlin Film Festival, but during COVID, while I actually was in Nelson, while the film was premiering online, totally virtual, it was very weird. So I was just on Baker Street where we were living while the film was premiering. Anyway, we had the North American period in Montana, and everybody was really happy with the project, and they thought that we, I think they were worried that we were going to condone him and make him into this sort of, this sort of prophet, and they were very happy that we really did strike a balance, and that we really, got things right. I mean, the people of Lincoln, Montana really opened up to us because I think we were finally telling the Lincoln version of what had happened. And they had seen a lot of material on Kaczynski and stuff that had been filmed in Georgia, and no one had ever come to Lincoln to actually do the correct version. And it was a pretty traumatic event for the town. The media took over the entire town for 3 months and really kind of treated everybody pretty poorly. Yeah, it was amazing to be full circle there, to have everybody kind of very excited, and actually even down to meeting Mikey for the first time, who's the kid who gets tutored, who was very happy that we got things right. And I had never met him before, and he had come to the screening, and his mother, we had worked with a lot to get things right for the library scenes, and who's still the librarian in Lincoln. And so just to have that, sort of stamp of approval from the Lincoln community kind of meant the most. So those were the toughest critics, and we came out of there very exhilarated by the response. Yeah, it was quite an experience, just sort of being fully embedded in that town of Lincoln over an entire year. That was the other thing too. We did film we made the movie over, we shot 4 different times, so we made it over all 4 seasons, so we could really get everything kind of right about the environment, and obviously place is sort of this, this other major character. So, very thankful to the town of Lincoln, Montana to open up to us.
Well, thanks so much, Tony, for bringing this back and sharing some of your thoughts on it. And thanks to everyone. We have a lobby for the next screening, so unless you need to use the washroom, you can exit out down here. And let's give a big hand of applause.
Thanks for coming out, and thanks for seeing it on the big screen, because it is on demand as well, if you want to tell anybody on iTunes, but I'm glad you guys saw it the right way, so thank you.
Right on.
Thank you.
Hey, Jason, there's no playlist for that.